You know, I remember where I tasted my first Haskap. It was that memorable.
An Introduction to Farming Honeyberries, or Haskap, with George Terwey of Haskap, Minnesota, brought to you by Madeline Wimmer, UMN Extension Fruit Production Educator.
Hello, my name is George Terwey, and I put in these plants about 10 years ago. The field I'm in has 1,650 plants, which is about 2 acres, which was recommended planting and spacing. You know, I'm kind of a pioneer. I think I'm the third largest grower in the state.
Honeyberries, also known as Haskap, are an extremely cold-hardy fruit crop emerging in the upper Midwest. Adapted to climates as cold as USDA Zone 2 and originally native to Siberia, they offer growers a unique opportunity to produce an early season berry with relatively low inputs and growing market potential.
You know, this field was probably fallow for 7 years, so yeah, a long time. I did amend the soil when I started. I had it tested. The only product I used was horse manure, just right down the row, and I haven't had to do anything else. These plants are Boreal Beauty and Boreal Beast, and the reason you need 2 different varieties is because they have to cross-pollinate. I planted 2/3 Beauty and 1/3 Beast. Beast is a little more oblong and it doesn't go through my berry cleaner as well. Beauty harvests very well, but actually the flavor on the Beast is a little more complex. So it's right, 1 row that, 2 rows of this, staggered all the way across the field. They're planted north to south for the sunlight. The rows are 12 feet apart, but Boreal Beast and Boreal Beauty are large plants and they're more upright growing. They're probably the 2 easiest plants to harvest. They will get between 5 and 6 feet wide and 5 and 6 feet high. So I put down the landscape fabric and then I planted inside of it. So this mulch, it only looks like it's 2 feet wide, but it's really 4 foot wide. I could recommend 6 foot wide. Might make it a little bit easier because as the plants get larger, it's a little hard to reach under for mowing. So far I've had no SWD, I've had no problems with insects or anything. The fruit really looks good. The only problem is birds. I have raspberries 100 yards away and they have it. So far so good. I am organic at this point. I sprayed with neem oil, which is an organic thing, and that was for scale insects when the plants were small. Now I don't even do that. I haven't used anything on these.
So, what's your biggest pest management issue?
Birds. Yeah. They'll wipe you out. They can't eat anymore, but you'll get a flock of 20 and then you'll have a flock of 200 within a couple days. And they peck all the fruit off the plants, even though they can't eat them. And it's so aggravating. You know, if they would eat them and get full and leave, they would. Cedar waxwing will not leave. They get them all on the ground. Every one on the ground will have a little triangular beak mark, and it's ruined. I had to use overhead netting to control the birds, and that's a lot of work, but it's also the most effective way to prevent the birds, cedar waxwings, from damaging your crop. You know, my nets have been up and they haven't degraded in the sun at all, so they last a long time. I keep them up only for the minimum amount of time necessary. I start on June 1st. Right after harvest, I take them down because if you get a storm, your nets could get damaged. I had some net damage from 1 storm, but it was a bad one.
Over-the-row netting is another option for growers who choose not to use perimeter netting, though it comes with its own considerations.
When the plants are ready to harvest, you have to leave the netting on until the morning you harvest. Then when you remove the nets, you might lose some fruit because if the fruit is just ready to drop, you shake it a little bit. Pulling off the nets, you might lose a little bit. Birds do learn how to push the net in and maybe get some fruit. The other thing too is, like, I like to mow right up as late as I can because that facilitates harvesting a little bit. So I have overhead nets and my tractors fit underneath it. These are 9.5 feet up in the air. If you net over the row, you can't get under there to mow and the grass will grow through the nets.
Honeyberries generally bloom in either April or May in Minnesota, depending on the growing region. Their flowers are unique in that they are super cold hardy.
the plants flower and you'll get a really hard frost, and there's so many tertiary buds, they just thrive in cold weather. You have to have cold weather in a dormant season, otherwise they won't produce. These plants only pollinate with insects and not with wind, so I love my pollinators. I have beekeepers in the area. Probably the majority of my pollinators are just wild bees, and they almost look like a fly. They're smaller than a honeybee. Bumblebees pollinate better than honeybees. They go back and forth between the rows, and honeybees don't. They go straight down the row. Like, who knew? I have a small pollinator garden, and that brings in a few. And then, well, there's dandelions all around us. Let the dandelions grow. I've had no problems with pollination whatsoever at all. So as the plants are getting bigger, I have to do more hedging and more training to keep them up. And last year I did a major hedging, and that worked well because I want that air movement underneath the plants, and my harvest trays don't fit that low anyway. You have to get under them. These look like they're off the ground, but when they're loaded with fruit, they're going to bend down. These plants are so early. They're as early as the earliest strawberries. My plants are kind of in the middle, but there's other varieties that are even earlier, but I'm usually done harvesting by the end of June. I don't harvest by hand. I am opening up pick your own, you pick, and that will work fine. But for the volume I need, we use a waxwing harvester, and you just go straight down the row. We can harvest a row in about an hour, and that currently produces about 800 pounds. So some people have a central harvesting building. So they'll shake the berries off the plant, which is really the only way to get any volume. And you only want the ones that are ripe enough to drop off anyway. These plants ripen very evenly. Other varieties don't. That's the other reason I picked these, is for ease of harvest. So I actually run my whole team, a team of 5 or 6 people, runs down the row. So we'll be shaking. I have a generator on the wagon. We run a berry cleaner which shakes and gets the leaves off, separates it, cleans it. Then there's all you can do is give it the once over by hand. Sure you don't get any of the little green ones because they would be sour. Get them nice and uniform. And then the other thing that I do is when I get to the end of the row, I try to get everything in my freezer within an hour. I just think that's important. It's the best way to preserve these. They don't have a long shelf life. 1,650 plants, they'll all eventually produce between 5 and 8 pounds. Do the math, I could easily get 8,000 pounds out of this field. So you'll have to work on a freezer, marketing. You want to be able to sell whole frozen berries, and the way you do that, you put them on giant half sheets, and then I put them in the freezer. Then they freeze in that single layer, and then you scrape them off and you put them in the bags, and that's all work I do inside the freezer. Then I Ziploc those 1.25-pound bag, put in the freezer, and then I can sell those. I market to wineries because they can use more pounds of fruit. And then my other market is jam. It just makes a delicious jam. They're like semi-sweet, kind of tart. The only reason there's honey in the name is because they're related to honeysuckle. But they have that tartness and really interesting flavors. And I think that's why the jam and the wine is so good. And you can, if you like to cook with them, you can find whole frozen or just fresh berries. Pretty much anything you can do with a blueberry, you can do with a Haskap.
To learn more about Haskap or honeyberries and other fruit crops, visit the University of Minnesota Extension website at extension.umn.edu. That's all for now. We'll see you next time.